Dr. Sarah Chen cradled her newborn daughter against her chest, feeling the gentle rise and fall of tiny breaths. The baby was only 3 days old, her features still wrinkled from the journey into the world. Sarah's husband Mark had gone to get supplies from the medical bay, leaving mother and child alone in their assigned quarters aboard the research station Harmony. The station orbited a distant planet where humanity had established its first successful diplomatic contact with an alien species. Sarah was part of the xenobiology team, but her pregnancy had reached full term just as the most crucial phase of cultural exchange began. The alien delegation, known as the Zephyrians, had been observing human behavior for months now, trying to understand what made their species so different from others in the galaxy. A soft meow interrupted Sarah's thoughts. Whiskers, the station's therapy cat, had somehow found his way into her quarters. The orange tabby had been brought aboard specifically to help with crew morale during the long mission. He was known for his uncanny ability to sense when someone needed comfort. Sarah smiled as Whiskers approached the bed where she sat nursing her daughter. The cat's green eyes studied the tiny human with what seemed like deliberate curiosity. Most animals would show little interest in human infants, but Whiskers had been different since the moment Emma was born. He had appeared outside the medical bay during labor, somehow knowing that something important was happening. "Hello, boy," Sarah whispered, careful not to wake Emma. "Want to meet our newest crew member?" Whiskers jumped onto the bed with practiced grace, settling himself at a respectful distance. His posture was alert but relaxed, tail curled neatly around his body. Sarah had studied enough animal behavior to recognize that Whiskers was displaying classic protective instincts, though she wondered why they had activated so strongly toward her baby. What Sarah didn't know was that her quarters were under constant observation. The Zephyrians had been granted permission to study human domestic behavior as part of their cultural exchange program. They were particularly interested in human family dynamics and emotional responses, as these concepts were largely foreign to their own species. In the observation chamber, 3 Zephyrian scientists watched through sophisticated monitoring equipment. Their crystalline bodies shimmered with colors that indicated deep concentration. Veltar, the lead researcher, adjusted the sensors to get a clearer view of the scene unfolding in Sarah's quarters. "The female has produced offspring," Veltar noted in their musical language. "She displays the expected protective behaviors we have documented." "But observe the small predator," added Zixia, pointing one of her 4 arms toward the screen. "It approaches the vulnerable offspring without triggering defensive responses from the mother. This is highly irregular." The third scientist, Mordak, flickered with patterns of confusion. Among the Zephyrians, any creature approaching another's offspring would be immediately attacked or driven away. Their species had evolved from solitary hunters, and parental protection was absolute and violent. The idea that a predator, even a small one, would be welcomed near a newborn was incomprehensible. "Perhaps the mother is ill," Mordak suggested. "Her defensive instincts may be compromised." But Veltar was studying the readings more carefully. The sensors showed that Sarah's stress levels were actually decreasing in the presence of the cat. Her heart rate had slowed, and her brain was producing increased levels of hormones associated with calm and contentment. This was the opposite of what any rational being should experience when a predator approached their offspring. "Something else is happening here," Veltar murmured. "We must continue observing." Back in the quarters, Sarah watched as Whiskers slowly inched closer to Emma. The cat's movements were deliberate and gentle, as if he understood the fragility of the tiny life before him. When he was close enough, he lowered his head and sniffed carefully at the baby's feet, his whiskers twitching as he processed the new scent. Emma stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Sarah held her breath, wondering what Whiskers would do next. She had read about cats sometimes being jealous of new babies, occasionally even acting aggressively toward them. But Whiskers showed no signs of aggression. Instead, he settled himself into a protective position near Emma's feet, close enough to provide warmth but far enough away to avoid accidentally disturbing her. The position Whiskers had chosen was strategically perfect. He could monitor anyone approaching the bed while remaining ready to either flee or defend if necessary. His ears swiveled constantly, tracking sounds throughout the quarters and the corridor beyond. Sarah realized that the cat had essentially appointed himself as Emma's guardian. "You're a good boy," she whispered. reaching out to gently stroke Whiskers' head. The cat began to purr, a low rumble that seemed to soothe Emma even further. In the observation chamber, the Zephyrian scientists were becoming increasingly agitated. Their bodies flickered with rapid color changes that indicated confusion and distress. What they were witnessing challenged everything they understood about predator-prey relationships and survival instincts. "The predator is making noise," Zixia observed, "but the offspring shows no fear response. If anything, it appears more relaxed. And the mother actively encourages this interaction," Mordak added. "She touches the predator voluntarily, despite it being positioned to attack her offspring." Veltar made careful notes on their recording device. The Zephyrians had studied dozens of species across the galaxy, but they had never encountered behavior like this. Most species followed predictable patterns of survival and reproduction. Mothers protected offspring from all potential threats. Predators either attacked or avoided other species' young. There was no middle ground, no cooperation between natural enemies. "We need to understand the purpose of this interaction," Veltar decided. "Perhaps the humans have formed some kind of symbiotic relationship with these small predators that provides survival advantages we haven't identified." The observation continued as Sarah began to fall asleep, still holding Emma against her chest. Whiskers remained vigilant, his eyes scanning the room while his purring continued to provide a soothing soundtrack. The cat's devotion to protecting this vulnerable human infant was absolute. Despite receiving no obvious benefit in return, for the Zephyrians, this was their first glimpse into something that would fundamentally challenge their understanding of intelligent life in the universe. They were witnessing the power of love, compassion, and interspecies bonding, concepts that had no equivalent in their own cold, logical society. The observation had only just begun. 3 days had passed since the Zephyrians first observed the strange interaction between Sarah, her newborn Emma, and the cat named Whiskers. What had begun as casual scientific observation had become an obsession for the alien research team. They watched in shifts now, ensuring that no moment of this unprecedented behavior went unrecorded. Sarah had returned to light duties, working from her quarters while caring for Emma. The baby was thriving, gaining weight and becoming more alert with each passing day, but it was Whiskers who continued to fascinate and perplex the alien observers. The cat had essentially moved into Sarah's quarters. He ate his meals there, slept near Emma's crib, and followed Sarah whenever she moved around the room with the baby. His devotion was complete and unwavering, as if he had accepted Emma as part of his own family unit. "The behavior is escalating," Veltar reported to the Zephyrian Council during their morning briefing. "The predator has established permanent residence with the offspring. It shows no signs of aggression, despite being in a perfect position to attack the most vulnerable member of the human pack." Commander Thelvas, the expedition leader, displayed patterns of deep skepticism across his crystalline surface. "Perhaps we have misunderstood the nature of this creature. Could it be a symbiotic species rather than a predator?" "Our biological scans confirm it is indeed a predatory species," Zixia interjected. "It possesses retractable claws, sharp teeth, and hunting instincts. By all measures, it should pose a threat to defenseless offspring. Yet it demonstrates protective behaviors instead," Mordak added. "We observed it yesterday when the maintenance drone entered the quarters. The predator positioned itself between the drone and the offspring, displaying clear defensive postures until the mechanical threat was removed." Commander Thelvas flickered with confusion. In Zephyrian society, protection was extended only to one's own genetic offspring, and only until they reached maturity. The concept of cross-species protection, especially without any apparent evolutionary benefit, was beyond their comprehension. Meanwhile, Sarah was experiencing the depth of Whiskers' devotion firsthand. When Emma cried during the night, Whiskers would immediately come to Sarah's bedside, gently pawing at her arm to wake her if she hadn't already stirred. During feeding times, he positioned himself as a living cushion, allowing Sarah to rest her arm on his warm, furry back while Emma nursed. Mark had returned from his supply run and was equally amazed by the cat's behavior. "It's like he thinks he's Emma's father," he observed, watching Whiskers carefully groom himself before settling down for another vigil beside the crib. "Maybe he does," Sarah replied, gently rocking Emma to sleep. I've read about animals adopting orphaned babies of other species, but I've never seen anything like this. Whiskers acts like Emma is his own kitten. What neither of them realized was that Whiskers had indeed formed a parental bond with Emma. The cat's brain chemistry had actually changed in response to prolonged exposure to the baby's scent and sounds. Hormones typically associated with caring for his own offspring were now being triggered by Emma's presence. From Whiskers' perspective, Emma was as much his baby as she was Sarah's. The alien observers documented every detail of this impossible relationship. They watched as Whiskers learned to distinguish between Emma's different cries, becoming agitated when she was hungry and remaining calm when she was simply tired. They recorded how he would gently touch his nose to her tiny hand when she was upset, seeming to offer comfort through physical contact. The predator is learning the offspring's communication patterns, Veltar noted during another observation session. It responds appropriately to different vocal signals. This level of cross-species communication is unprecedented, Zixia agreed. Even among our own allied species, such detailed behavioral adaptation is rare. But perhaps the most remarkable moment came on the 4th day of observation. Emma had developed a slight fever. Nothing serious, but enough to make her fussy and uncomfortable. Sarah was pacing the room, trying various methods to soothe her crying daughter, when Whiskers did something extraordinary. The cat approached Sarah and began to purr with unusual intensity. But instead of his normal quiet rumble, he produced a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to fill the entire room. Emma's crying gradually subsided as the sound enveloped her. Within minutes, she was calm and beginning to fall asleep in Sarah's arms. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered to Mark in amazement. It's like he knew exactly what she needed. In the observation chamber, the Zephyrian scientists were experiencing something approaching emotional shock. Their instruments had recorded the exact frequency of Whiskers' purring and discovered that it matched the optimal vibrational pattern for promoting healing and calm in human infants. The cat had somehow instinctively known how to help Emma feel better. "This is impossible," Mordak stated, his color shifting rapidly through the spectrum. "The predator has no genetic knowledge of human offspring physiology. How could it know the correct therapeutic frequency? Unless," Veltar said slowly, "the relationship between these species is far more advanced than we initially assumed." Commander Thelvas was called to review the recordings personally. As he watched the footage of Whiskers soothing Emma with his purr, his own crystalline structure began to resonate with frequencies that indicated profound cognitive dissonance. "Are you suggesting that these humans have achieved some form of psychic bond with their predator species?" he asked. "Not psychic," Veltar corrected. "Something more remarkable. They appear to have developed genuine emotional connections that transcend species boundaries. The predator cares for the human offspring not because of programming or instinct, but because it has chosen to do so." The concept of choice in emotional bonding was revolutionary to the Zephyrians. Their own relationships were based on genetic compatibility, logical necessity, and survival advantage. The idea that beings could form deep attachments simply because they cared about each other's well-being was as foreign to them as magic. As the day progressed, they watched Sarah place Emma in her crib for a nap. Whiskers immediately took up his protective position, but this time he did something new. He reached out with one paw and gently placed it on Emma's chest, right over her heart. His purring resumed at a low, steady frequency that seemed to help regulate the baby's breathing and heart rate. "The predator is actively monitoring the offspring's vital signs," Zixia observed. "It has learned to use its natural abilities to provide medical support." Sarah noticed Whiskers' new behavior and felt tears forming in her eyes. The love and dedication this simple cat showed for her daughter was overwhelming. In a universe where her species was still proving its worth to advanced alien civilizations, here was a perfect example of the compassion and emotional depth that made humanity special. "Good boy, Whiskers," she whispered, gently stroking his head. "Thank you for loving her." The alien observers recorded this moment of gratitude between species, still struggling to understand the profound implications of what they were witnessing. They had come to study human behavior as part of a diplomatic mission, but they were discovering something far more significant about the nature of consciousness and connection in the universe. The bond between Whiskers and Emma was just beginning to reveal its true power. The first real test of Whisker's devotion came on Emma's 10th day of life. Sarah was in the middle of her morning routine when the station's emergency alarm began blaring through the corridors. Red warning lights flashed as the automated system announced a containment breach in the biological research lab. "All personnel to emergency stations." The computer's voice echoed throughout harmony. "This is not a drill." "Repeat, this is not a drill." Sarah's heart raced as she gathered Emma from her crib. The baby was startled by the sudden noise and began crying, her tiny fists waving in distress. Whiskers immediately appeared at Sarah's side, his fur standing on end and his ears flattened against his head. Despite his own fear, he stayed close to both mother and child. Mark burst through the door, already suited up in his emergency gear. "Sarah, we need to get to the safe room now. There's been a breach in Lab 7. Some kind of atmospheric contamination." The safe room was located 3 levels down, accessible only through a series of maintenance corridors and emergency ladders. It would be a dangerous journey under the best circumstances, but carrying a newborn made it nearly impossible. "I can't make that climb with Emma," Sarah said, her voice tight with panic. "She's too small, too fragile." Mark's face was grim as he ran calculations in his head. The contamination was spreading through the station's air circulation system. They had maybe 20 minutes before it reached their section. In the observation chamber, the Zephyrian scientists watched this unfolding crisis with intense interest. They had been hoping to see how humans responded to genuine threats, particularly when the safety of offspring was involved. "Now we will observe true human behavior," Commander Thelva stated. "When survival is at stake, all species abandon secondary concerns and focus on genetic preservation." Veltar adjusted the sensors to track the humans' stress levels and decision-making patterns. "The parents will likely choose to preserve their own lives and abandon the offspring if carrying it proves too difficult. This is the logical choice for species survival, but Whiskers had other plans." As Mark and Sarah debated their options, the cat began exhibiting behavior none of them had seen before. He moved to Emma's crib and carefully gripped the edge of her blanket in his teeth. Then, with surprising strength and coordination, he began dragging the blanket toward the door. "What is he doing?" Sarah asked, momentarily distracted from their crisis. Whiskers released the blanket and looked directly at Sarah, then at Emma, then back at Sarah. His green eyes were filled with an intensity that seemed almost human. He moved to the baby carrier that sat in the corner of the room and began pawing at it insistently. "I think he's trying to help," Mark said in amazement. "He understands that we need to move Emma." The cat continued his urgent pantomime, alternating between the baby carrier and the door. When Sarah finally understood and began putting Emma in the carrier, Whiskers calmed slightly but remained hyper-alert. "The predator is attempting to assist in offspring evacuation," Mordak observed, his colors shifting to indicate confusion. "This behavior serves no survival benefit for the creature itself." Zixia's pattern showed deep contemplation. "In fact, remaining with the humans during an emergency significantly decreases the predator's own survival chances. It could easily escape through the ventilation system, yet it chooses to stay with the offspring." As they prepared to leave, Whiskers did something even more remarkable. He positioned himself at the front of their small group, taking point like a military scout. His heightened senses allowed him to detect changes in air quality and hear sounds that the humans couldn't perceive. He would advance a few steps, pause to assess the environment, then signal with a soft chirp when it was safe to follow. The journey through the emergency corridors was treacherous. The station's gravity generators were fluctuating, making movement unpredictable. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows that danced across the walls. But Whiskers never wavered in his protective role. When they reached the first junction, Whiskers suddenly stopped and flattened himself against the floor. His ears were pressed back and he was staring intently down the left corridor. Mark started to move in that direction, but Whiskers quickly stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "He's warning us about something," Sarah realized. "Whiskers, what do you sense?" As if in answer to her question, a section of the ceiling in the left corridor suddenly collapsed, sending debris crashing to the floor exactly where they would have been walking. Whiskers had somehow detected the structural weakness before it became visible to human eyes. "Good boy," Mark breathed, his respect for the cat growing by the minute. "Lead us the safe way." In the observation chamber, the Zephyrian scientists were experiencing something their species had no word for: awe. They watched as this small predator repeatedly risked its own safety to protect humans who weren't even its own species. The creature is using its enhanced sensory capabilities to benefit the human pack, Veltar noted. It has taken on the role of advanced scout in a survival situation. But why? Commander Thelvis demanded. What evolutionary advantage does this behavior provide? Perhaps, Zixia said quietly. Evolution isn't the only force that drives behavior in some species. Whiskers continued to guide them through the maze of corridors and emergency passages. At one point, they encountered a section where the contaminated air had begun to seep through the ventilation system. The cat immediately detected the danger and led them on a longer but safer route that avoided the affected area entirely. When Emma began crying from hunger and stress, Whiskers stopped their entire party. He approached the baby carrier and began his therapeutic purring, the deep vibrations helping to calm the infant even in these frightening circumstances. Only when Emma had settled did he signal that they should continue moving. He's putting her needs above the mission, Sarah observed with tears in her eyes. Even when our lives are in danger, he still prioritizes her comfort. Finally, after what felt like hours but was actually only 37 minutes, they reached the safe room. The heavy blast doors sealed behind them, cutting off any trace of contaminated air. They had made it to safety, and it was largely due to Whiskers' guidance and protection. As they settled into the secure chamber with other survivors, Whiskers immediately resumed his protective position near Emma's carrier. Despite having just completed an exhausting and dangerous journey, his first concern was ensuring the baby's safety and comfort. Dr. Harrison, the station's chief medical officer, noticed the cat's behavior with professional interest. I've seen therapy animals, but never anything like this. It's almost like he understands the concept of family responsibility. He does understand, Sarah said firmly. He's appointed himself as Emma's protector, and nothing is going to make him abandon that duty. In the observation chamber, the Zephyrian scientists were recording everything with growing amazement. Their entire understanding of predator behavior, survival instincts, and species interaction was being challenged by this one small Earth creature. The predator chose group survival over individual advantage, Veltar stated, reviewing the data. It used its abilities to protect beings who provide no genetic benefit. This contradicts our fundamental understanding of natural selection. Commander Thelvis was struggling to process what he had witnessed. In Zephyrian society, such selfless behavior was not just rare, it was considered a form of mental illness that would be corrected through treatment. Are we certain this creature is operating under normal mental parameters? He asked. All scans indicate perfect psychological health, Moradak confirmed. The predator made conscious choices to risk its safety for others. This appears to be normal behavior for its species when in proximity to humans. As the all-clear signal finally sounded, and they prepared to return to their quarters, Sarah watched Whiskers perform one final protective sweep of their area, before settling beside Emma's carrier. The depth of love and commitment this simple cat displayed was profound beyond measure. Thank you, she whispered to him. Thank you for keeping us all safe. The alien observers had just witnessed something that would change their understanding of consciousness and connection forever. They had seen pure love in action, transcending species boundaries and evolutionary logic. For the first time in their history, they were beginning to understand that there might be forces in the universe more powerful than survival instinct and genetic programming. Following the emergency evacuation, the Zephyrian research team made a decision that would reshape their entire mission. Commander Thelvis authorized an expansion of their observational study to include all human-animal interactions aboard the station. If Whiskers' behavior was representative of a broader pattern, they needed to understand its full scope. We will observe every creature the humans have brought with them, the commander declared during their briefing. If this emotional bonding phenomenon extends beyond a single predator and infant pair, it may represent a fundamental characteristic of human consciousness. Veltar began coordinating the expanded surveillance, while Zixia and Mordak were assigned to catalog and analyze all documented instances of interspecies relationships. What they discovered over the following days challenged every assumption they had made about Earth's inhabitants. The station housed more animals than the Zephyrians had initially realized. Beyond Whiskers, there were 3 other therapy cats. 2 dogs that served as emotional support animals for the crew, a small aquarium of fish in the recreational area, and even a collection of plants that the humans tended with remarkable care. Their first subject after Whiskers was Lieutenant Rodriguez and his German shepherd. Max, as the dog, served as both a companion and a working animal, trained to detect various atmospheric anomalies that might pose threats to the crew. But what fascinated the alien observers was the relationship between Rodriguez and Max during off-duty hours. The canine predator sleeps in the humans' quarters, Mordak noted during his initial observations. Despite having its own designated rest area, it chooses to remain near its human partner. They watched as Rodriguez would spend his free time teaching Max new tricks, not for any practical purpose but simply because both seemed to enjoy the interaction. The human would reward the dog with treats and physical affection, while Max would respond with what could only be described as joy, tail wagging, enthusiastic jumping, and what humans called kisses. The human is sharing food resources with a creature that could theoretically hunt for itself, Zixia observed, and the canine is expending energy on behaviors that serve no survival function. But it was during a routine maintenance operation that they witnessed the true depth of the Rodriguez-Max bond. Rodriguez was performing repairs in a section of the station where the artificial gravity was malfunctioning. As he worked, a piece of heavy equipment broke free from its moorings and began falling toward him. Max, who had been lying nearby, immediately launched himself through the air. Despite the unpredictable gravity, he managed to collide with Rodriguez, knocking the human out of the path of the falling debris. The equipment crashed where Rodriguez had been standing just moments before. The canine deliberately exposed itself to mortal danger to preserve the human, Veltar recorded, his voice filled with what could only be described as amazement. There was no hesitation, no calculation of personal risk. The protective response was instantaneous. Rodriguez gathered Max in his arms, checking frantically for injuries. Fortunately, the dog had only suffered minor bruises. But the human's emotional response was intense. Tears streamed down his face as he held his companion. "You saved my life, boy," Rodriguez whispered. "You beautiful, crazy dog, you saved my life." The alien observers watched this display of gratitude and affection with growing understanding. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of mutual protection and care that seemed to define human-animal relationships. Their next observation target was Dr. Kim and her collection of therapy cats. Unlike Whiskers, who had bonded specifically with Emma, these cats seemed to have formed collective relationships with multiple humans. They would move throughout the station, somehow sensing which crew members needed comfort and providing it without being asked. The felines appear to have assigned themselves to emotional support duties, Zixia noted. They seek out humans displaying stress indicators and provide physical comfort through tactile contact and sound vibrations. They watched as Mittens, a gray tabby, spent an entire shift with Engineer Santos, who was struggling with homesickness. The cat remained close to the human throughout his work period, occasionally purring or rubbing against his leg. By the end of the shift, Santos's stress indicators had significantly decreased. The predator is actively working to improve the human's psychological state, Mordak observed. But what benefit does it receive in return? The answer came during feeding time. Despite being well fed by automated systems, the cats would often refuse to eat unless their human companions were present. They seemed to derive emotional satisfaction from shared meals, turning a basic survival activity into a social bonding experience. They eat together, Veltar noted with growing excitement, not for efficiency or protection but for companionship. They have transformed a purely functional activity into an emotional ritual. The observation of Chief Petty Officer Jackson and his goldfish, Bubbles, initially seemed trivial compared to the dramatic examples of cats and dogs. But the Zephyrians soon realized that even this simple relationship revealed profound insights about human nature. Jackson would spend time each day talking to the fish, telling it about his work, his concerns, and his hopes. The fish, of course, could not respond verbally, but Jackson seemed to find comfort in the one-sided conversation. The human is forming an emotional attachment to a creature incapable of reciprocal communication, Zixia observed. The relationship provides no practical benefits, yet the human invests significant time and emotional energy in maintaining it. They watched as Jackson carefully monitored the water temperature, ensured the fish was properly fed, and even decorated the tank with small ornaments that served no purpose other than aesthetics. When Bubbles died unexpectedly from old age, Jackson's grief was genuine and profound. The human is experiencing psychological distress over the loss of a creature that provided no survival advantages, Mordack noted. This suggests that humans form attachments based on emotional, rather than practical, considerations. The funeral that Jackson held for Bubbles, a small ceremony where he said a few words before releasing the fish's body into the station's recycling system, seemed absurd to the Zephyrian observers. Yet they could not deny the healing effect it had on the human's emotional state. Commander Thelvas was called to review the accumulated data after a week of expanded observations. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Humans formed profound emotional bonds with other species as a fundamental aspect of their nature. Every human on this station has established some form of interspecies relationship, Veltar reported. These bonds transcend practical considerations and appear to be based entirely on emotional satisfaction and mutual care. But most remarkably, Zixia added, the animals reciprocate these feelings. They have adapted their behavior to provide emotional support, protection, and companionship to their human partners. Commander Thelva studied the recordings in silence, his crystalline structure flickering through complex patterns as he processed the implications. In Zephyrian society, relationships were contractual arrangements based on mutual benefit and genetic compatibility. Emotional attachments were considered weaknesses that interfered with logical decision-making. Are you suggesting that humans have somehow convinced predatory species to abandon their nature and become protective companions? He asked. Not convinced, Veltar corrected. They have created an environment where love and trust can flourish between species. The animals choose to form these bonds because they find emotional fulfillment in the relationships. The concept was revolutionary. If humans could inspire such devotion from creatures that should logically view them as either prey or competition, what did that say about their potential for forming alliances with alien species? We need to understand the mechanism, Commander Thelvas decided. How do humans achieve this transformation of natural instincts? What allows them to create these impossible bonds? Mordack had been analyzing the neurochemical data from both humans and animals during bonding interactions. The answer appears to be remarkably simple, he said. Humans generate and respond to what they call love, a complex emotional state that promotes protective behavior, empathy, and self-sacrifice. When animals experience this emotional state through interaction with humans, their behavior patterns fundamentally change. Love, Commander Thelvas repeated the word slowly, as if testing its meaning. And this love is powerful enough to override millions of years of evolutionary programming. According to our observations, Veltar confirmed, love appears to be the most powerful force affecting behavior that we have encountered in any species. As they continued their observations, the Zephyrians began to realize they were witnessing something that could change the entire galaxy's understanding of consciousness, emotion, and the potential for peaceful coexistence between different forms of life. Humans didn't just coexist with other species, they transformed them through the power of love and compassion. The implications for galactic diplomacy were staggering. Something unexpected was happening to the Zephyrian observation team. After 2 weeks of studying human-animal bonds, their own behavior patterns were beginning to change in ways that defied their species' fundamental nature. It started with Veltar. During a routine analysis session, he found himself lingering over footage of Sarah reading to Emma while Whiskers curled nearby. The scene served no scientific purpose. They had already documented the bonding behaviors extensively. Yet he continued watching. Veltar, you have reviewed this sequence 17 times, Zixia noted, her crystalline form flickering with patterns of confusion. Have you identified new data that requires this level of analysis? Veltar paused, considering the question. The honest answer was no. He was watching because something about the peaceful domestic scene created what humans might call pleasant feelings in his consciousness. But Zephyrians didn't experience pleasant feelings for their own sake. I am ensuring accuracy in our documentation, he replied, though his colors betrayed uncertainty about his own motivations. Mordack was experiencing similar anomalies. He had begun requesting to observe Lieutenant Rodriguez and Max during their training sessions, claiming it was necessary to understand interspecies communication patterns. But he found himself focusing less on the data and more on what appeared to be mutual joy between human and dog. The canine's tail movement patterns suggest emotional satisfaction, Mordak observed during one session, and the human's facial expressions indicate similar positive emotional states. "We have established this correlation already," Zixia replied. "Why do you continue to monitor these interactions?" Mordak's form shimmered with colors he had never displayed before. "I find their happiness interesting." The word happiness was not a typical part of Zephyrian vocabulary. They understood contentment as the absence of problems, but the active joy displayed by humans and their animal companions was a foreign concept that they were only beginning to grasp. Commander Thelvis noticed the changes in his research team during their daily briefings. Their reports were becoming longer and more detailed, but less focused on scientific analysis and more on emotional observations. Veltar had started describing Whiskers as devoted, rather than protective. Mordak referred to Max as loyal instead of behaviorally conditioned. Zixia had begun using the word love without quotation marks. "Your objectivity appears to be compromised," the commander noted during one briefing. "You are beginning to interpret observations through emotional rather than scientific frameworks." "Commander," Veltar replied, "we are discovering that emotional frameworks may be more accurate for understanding this phenomenon than scientific ones. Logic cannot explain why a cat would risk its life for a human infant, but love can." The commander's crystalline structure flickered with alarm patterns. "Love is not a quantifiable force. It cannot be measured or predicted. It has no basis in rational thought. Yet it consistently produces measurable results," Zixia countered. "Every prediction model based on logical behavior has failed when applied to human-animal relationships. Models based on emotional bonding have proven far more accurate." This was dangerous territory for Zephyrian thinking. Their entire civilization was built on logic, efficiency, and rational decision-making. Emotions were considered remnants of primitive evolutionary stages that advanced species should overcome, but the evidence was undeniable. The longer they observed the humans, the more the Zephyrian team found themselves experiencing something that could only be described as emotional responses to what they witnessed. The breakthrough came when Emma fell, ill with a minor respiratory infection. It was nothing serious by human medical standards, but her small size made even minor illnesses concerning. Sarah and Mark took turns monitoring her throughout the night, while Whiskers never left his protective position beside her crib. As Emma's breathing became slightly labored, Whiskers did something extraordinary. He began purring at a specific frequency that matched her breathing pattern, gradually slowing his vibrations to help regulate her respiratory rate. When her temperature spiked, he positioned his warm body against the crib to provide additional heat. When she became restless, he gently touched his paw to her hand to provide comfort. "The feline is actively providing medical intervention," Veltar observed, but his voice carried a quality that hadn't been there before: concern. The alien scientists watched throughout the night as Whiskers maintained his vigil. The cat didn't eat, didn't rest, didn't attend to any of his own needs. His entire existence was focused on helping Emma recover. "He is suffering," Mordak said quietly. "The predator is experiencing distress because the offspring is unwell." Zixia's patterns shifted to deeper, more complex colors. "I find myself hoping that the infant recovers quickly for the well-being of both species." Commander Thelvis, monitoring the team's observations remotely, noticed the emotional language creeping into their reports. "You are anthropomorphizing the subjects," he warned. "Your objective analysis is being compromised by proximity to human emotional responses." But something had fundamentally changed in the observation team. They were no longer studying human behavior from a distance. They were becoming emotionally invested in the outcomes they witnessed. When Emma's fever broke and she began breathing normally again, the relief that flooded through the observation chamber was palpable. Veltar's colors brightened to patterns associated with joy, while Mordek's form practically sang with harmonious vibrations. "The offspring has recovered," Zixia reported, but her voice carried unmistakable happiness. Whiskers, exhausted from his night-long vigil, finally allowed himself to rest beside Emma's crib. His purring resumed its normal contented rhythm as he watched the baby sleep peacefully. Look at his dedication, Veltar said softly. He protected her through the entire crisis, never wavering in his commitment. It is remarkable, Mordak agreed. The depth of caring between these species exceeds anything in our documented experiences. Commander Thelvis was becoming alarmed by his team's responses. They were beginning to sound more like humans than Zephyrians, using emotional language and expressing personal investments in the subjects they were studying. Report to the medical bay for psychological evaluation, he ordered. Your behavior patterns indicate possible contamination by human emotional responses. But when the medical team examined Veltar, Mordak, and Zixia, they found something unprecedented. The scientists' brain chemistry had actually begun to change. Prolonged exposure to displays of love and compassion had triggered the development of new neural pathways associated with empathy and emotional bonding. It appears that the capacity for love is not species-specific, Dr. Kelmun reported to the commander. Extended observation of these emotional states has activated dormant neural structures in our scientists' brains. Can the condition be reversed? Commander Thelvis asked, though he was already beginning to experience similar symptoms himself. Unknown, but more importantly, should it be reversed? The affected individuals show enhanced problem-solving abilities, improved stress management, and greater creative thinking. These emotional responses may actually represent an evolutionary advancement rather than contamination. The idea that emotions could improve rather than impair cognitive function was revolutionary to Zephyrian thinking. Their society had spent millennia trying to eliminate emotional responses, believing them to be primitive and counterproductive. But the evidence was mounting that humans had achieved something remarkable. They had learned to harness the power of love and emotional connection to create bonds that transcended natural barriers. These bonds made them stronger, more resilient, and more capable of forming alliances with other species. As Commander Thelvis watched footage of Whiskers gently grooming Emma's tiny fingers while she slept, he felt something unprecedented in his own consciousness. A warm, pleasant sensation that humans would recognize as affection. Perhaps, he said to himself, we have been studying the wrong species. Perhaps we are the ones who need to learn from the humans. The observation continued, but now with a new purpose. The Zephyrians were no longer just studying human behavior. They were learning to experience the emotions that made such remarkable relationships possible. They were discovering that love was not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength that could transform entire civilizations. For the first time in their species' history, the Zephyrians were beginning to understand what it meant to care for another being, simply because caring felt right. 3 weeks after the Zephyrian observation team began experiencing their emotional awakening, the station faced its greatest crisis yet. A cascading system failure triggered by a micrometeorite impact had damaged the main power grid, life support systems, and emergency backup generators simultaneously. The station was dying and evacuation protocols were initiated immediately. All personnel to evacuation pods, the automated system announced. This is a code black emergency. Complete station abandonment is required within 47 minutes. The evacuation procedures were clear and had been drilled countless times. Crew members were to proceed directly to their assigned pods with only essential equipment. No personal items, no delays, no exceptions. The pods had limited life support and could only sustain their occupants for the journey to the rescue ships already en route. Sarah and Mark reached their pod assignment quickly, Emma secured in her emergency carrier. But as they prepared to enter the evacuation pod, Sarah realized something that made her heart stop. Whiskers isn't here, she said, looking around frantically. Where's Whiskers? Mark checked their pod's passenger manifest. Sarah, he's not on the list. The evacuation protocols don't include non-essential animals. He'll be going on the auxiliary transport with the other cats. Sarah's face went pale. The auxiliary transport was scheduled to launch 20 minutes after the human evacuation pods. With the station's failing systems, there was no guarantee it would survive long enough for departure. We can't leave him, Sarah said firmly. He's part of our family. Sarah, be reasonable, Mark pleaded. The pod can only sustain 3 human life forms. Adding another breathing organism could compromise everyone's survival. In the observation chamber, the Zephyrian team watched this moral crisis unfold with intense fascination. They understood the logical choice. Humans should evacuate immediately and ensure their own survival. The attachment to the small predator, while understandable, should not override rational decision-making in a life-threatening situation. But they had learned enough about human nature to suspect the outcome might be different. The humans will choose logical survival, Commander Thelvas predicted, though his certainty was diminished by weeks of witnessing unexpected human behavior. They cannot risk the offspring's life for emotional attachments. Veltar, now deeply affected by his emotional transformation, wasn't so sure. Have we learned nothing from our observations? These humans don't abandon family members regardless of species. Sarah made her decision with the quiet determination that had impressed the aliens throughout their study. I'm going to find Whiskers. Get Emma to the pod and prepare for launch. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, leave without me. Sarah, no, Mark protested. You can't risk your life for a cat. But Sarah was already moving, her medical training kicking in as she navigated the chaotic corridors filled with emergency lighting and rushing personnel. She had memorized Whisker's favorite hiding spots during emergencies, and she knew he would be terrified by the alarms and confusion. The alien observers tracked her progress through the station's surveillance system, amazed by her determination to rescue a creature that provided no survival advantage in the current crisis. The female is risking her own life and potentially her offspring's survival to save the predator, Mordak observed. This defies all logic. But it perfectly embodies everything we've learned about human love, Zixia replied softly. She cannot abandon someone she considers family, even if that someone is a different species. Sarah found Whiskers exactly where she expected, under a console in the botanical lab, pressed against the wall and trembling with fear. The familiar orange tabby looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes when she called his name. There you are, baby, Sarah whispered, crawling under the console to reach him. We're getting out of here together. Whiskers immediately calmed when Sarah's hands touched him, his trust in her absolute despite the chaos surrounding them. She gathered him into her arms and began the desperate journey back to the evacuation pods. But the station's deterioration was accelerating faster than anticipated. A section of corridor between Sarah and the pod bay collapsed just as she reached it, blocking her primary route. Emergency lighting failed in several sections, plunging areas into complete darkness. Evacuation pods launching in 8 minutes, the computer announced. All personnel must be aboard immediately. In the observation chamber, the Zephyrian team was experiencing something unprecedented, fear for the safety of beings they had grown to care about. Their objective scientific detachment had been completely replaced by emotional investment in the outcome. She will not reach the evacuation zone in time, Veltar said, his voice carrying genuine distress. The collapse has blocked the most direct route, Mordak confirmed. She would need to navigate through sections where life support has already failed. Commander Thelvas watched the unfolding drama with complex emotions he was still learning to identify. Why would she risk everything for one small creature? Because that is what love means, Zixia replied. It means you don't abandon family no matter the cost. Sarah was indeed running out of time, but she had one advantage the aliens hadn't considered: Whiskers himself. The cat's enhanced senses allowed him to detect safe pathways through the damaged station that human instruments couldn't identify. As if understanding their desperate situation, Whiskers began indicating directions with soft chirps and head movements. When Sarah followed his guidance, she found herself taking routes through maintenance areas and emergency passages that avoided the worst of the damage. The predator is guiding her, Veltar observed with amazement. It understands the crisis and is using its abilities to ensure their mutual survival. They are working together, Mordak added. True partnership in the face of mortal danger. With Whiskers' help, Sarah reached the pod bay with 90 seconds to spare. Mark was waiting at their pod's entrance, relief flooding his face when he saw them both. I knew you'd make it, he said, helping her into the pod. I would never have left without you. As their evacuation pod sealed and launched from the dying station, Sarah held both Emma and Whiskers close to her chest. The three beings who had formed such an unlikely but powerful bond were safe together. I couldn't leave him, Sarah said simply. He's family. In the observation chamber, the Zephyrian team was experiencing what humans would recognize as tears, crystalline formations that appeared on their surfaces during moments of intense emotion. She risked her life to save him, Veltar said wonderingly. And he used his abilities to save her in return. They rescued each other. This is the power of the bonds we have been studying, Sixia realized. Love doesn't just create emotional connections. It creates partnerships that make individuals stronger than they could ever be alone, Commander. Thelvas was recording his final observations on the human study, but his conclusions were radically different from what he had expected to find. The humans have achieved something we believed impossible. They have transcended the limitations of individual species through emotional bonding. Their capacity for love allows them to form alliances that enhance the survival capabilities of all involved parties. As the evacuation pods reached the safety of the rescue ships, Sarah sat with her family, human and feline, and marveled at what they had just survived together. Whiskers was purring contentedly in her lap, while Emma slept peacefully in her arms. The Zephyrian observers had just witnessed the ultimate demonstration of what made humanity special in the universe. It wasn't their technology, their intelligence, or their military capabilities. It was their ability to love across all boundaries and to create bonds that transformed everyone involved. The implications for galactic diplomacy were about to become clear. 6 months after the evacuation of Research Station Harmony, Commander Thelvas stood before the Galactic Council, preparing to deliver a report that would fundamentally alter the course of interstellar civilization. The crystalline chamber housed representatives from 47 different species, all waiting to hear the results of the most comprehensive study ever conducted on human behavior. Honored council members, Commander Thelvas began, his form displaying patterns of confidence mixed with something the Assembly had never seen from a Zephyrian before. Warmth. Our investigation into human social dynamics has yielded discoveries that challenge our understanding of consciousness, evolution, and the potential for interspecies cooperation. The council chamber hummed with anticipation. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy for their meticulous research and logical conclusions. Their reports shaped policy and influenced how species interacted with each other. The human capacity for emotional bonding transcends any previously documented phenomenon. The commander continued. They form genuine partnerships with other species based not on mutual benefit or genetic similarity, but on what they term love. Ambassador Krell of the Vorthak Empire, a militaristic species that dominated through conquest and intimidation, flickered with skeptical patterns. You speak of emotions as if they were tools of power. Our studies indicate that emotional attachment makes species vulnerable to manipulation and defeat. On the contrary, Commander Thelvas replied, his confidence growing. We observed humans and their animal companions facing life-threatening situations together. The emotional bonds between them created tactical advantages that pure logic could never achieve. They communicate without words, coordinate instinctively, and will sacrifice themselves to protect each other. This makes them exponentially more dangerous as enemies and infinitely more valuable as allies. He activated the chamber's holographic display system, showing footage of Whiskers guiding Sarah through the damaged station during the evacuation. The assembled representatives watched in fascination as the small Earth creature used its enhanced senses to save both their lives. This predator had no logical reason to risk its life for a human, Commander Thelvas explained. Yet it chose to do so because of emotional attachment. The human, in turn, risked her own survival to rescue the creature. Neither action makes sense from a purely evolutionary perspective. Yet both were essential to their mutual survival. Counselor Zenth of the Meridian Collective, a highly intellectual species that prized knowledge above all else, projected patterns of intrigue. Are you suggesting that emotions can enhance logical decision-making rather than impair it? Veltar stepped forward to answer, his own transformation evident in the warm colors that now characterized his normal state. Our research team experienced firsthand the cognitive benefits of emotional development. After exposure to human bonding behaviors, we demonstrated improved problem-solving abilities, enhanced creativity, and better stress management. The admission sent ripples of shock through the assembly. Zephyrians were known for their cold logic and emotional suppression. The idea that they had voluntarily developed feelings was revolutionary. Furthermore, Veltar continued, we have observed that species exposed to human emotional influence undergo positive behavioral modifications. The animals aboard their station demonstrated intelligence, loyalty, and cooperation far beyond their natural capabilities. Mordak activated another holographic sequence, showing Max saving Lieutenant Rodriguez from falling debris. The canine's protective response was instantaneous and selfless. It had learned to value its human partner's life above its own survival, a concept previously thought impossible in predator species. Ambassador Shendar of the Peaceful Luminous Consortium spoke with harmonious tones that indicated deep consideration. If humans can inspire such devotion from their own planet's predators, what might they accomplish with willing alien partners? The question hung in the air like a revelation. For millennia, galactic civilization had been based on careful treaties, mutual benefit calculations, and the constant threat of warfare. Species cooperated when it served their interests and withdrew when it didn't. True alliance, the kind where beings would die for each other, was considered a myth. Commander Thelva shared the most remarkable footage from their study. The moment when Whiskers first chose to sleep beside baby Emma, beginning the bond that would eventually save both their lives. We documented the exact moment when interspecies love began, he explained. The predator made a conscious choice to protect an infant of another species. From that moment forward, its behavior was guided not by instinct or training, but by genuine affection and protective devotion. Zixia stepped forward to address the council, her colors now displaying the complex patterns they had learned to associate with love and compassion. We propose that humans represent the next evolutionary step in consciousness, the ability to form emotional bonds that transcend species barriers. This capability could transform galactic civilization. The implications were staggering. If humans could inspire the same devotion in alien species that they did in their animal companions, the galaxy could experience unprecedented cooperation and peace. Consider the possibilities, Commander Thelvis continued. Trade agreements based on friendship rather than exploitation. Military alliances founded on mutual protection rather than temporary convenience. Scientific collaboration driven by shared curiosity rather than competitive advantage. Emperor Korgan of the Void Dominion, whose species had built an empire through fear and subjugation, projected patterns of deep skepticism. You speak of transformation as if it were desirable. Emotional bonds create weakness. They make beings predictable and exploitable. But Veltar had anticipated this objection. Our observations suggest the opposite, Your Magnificence. The human-animal partnerships we studied were extremely difficult to predict using traditional logical models. Their responses were creative, adaptive, and often tactically superior to purely rational approaches. Moreover, Zixia added, the bonds created strength rather than vulnerability. When one member of a bonded pair was threatened, both became more formidable. Love multiplied their capabilities rather than dividing them. The debate that followed would be remembered as one of the most significant in galactic history. Species after species shared their own observations of humans, adding evidence to the growing understanding that Earth's inhabitants represented something genuinely new in the universe. The Aquatic Assembly reported that human diplomats had successfully negotiated peace between their traditionally warring subspecies by appealing to shared emotional connections. The Silicon Collective described how human engineers had formed working partnerships with their artificial intelligences that exceeded all previous productivity records. Even the notorious ghost merchants admitted that humans were their most trusted trading partners because of their emotional reliability. As the evidence mounted, a consensus began to emerge. Humanity's capacity for love and emotional bonding wasn't just a curiosity. It was a revolutionary force that could reshape galactic civilization. The final vote was unprecedented in its unanimity. For the first time in the Council's history, all 47 species agreed on a single resolution. Humanity would be granted not just membership in the Galactic Council, but a special advisory role in mediating disputes and fostering cooperation between species. Let it be recorded, announced the Council speaker, that on this day we recognize the human gift of love as a galactic treasure to be protected and nurtured. May their example guide us toward a future of true unity among the stars. Back on the new research station where the evacuated crew had been relocated, Sarah sat in her quarters with 6-month-old Emma playing on a blanket, while Whiskers watched protectively nearby. She had no idea that her simple act of allowing a cat to sleep beside her newborn had started a revolution that would transform an entire galaxy. Emma reached out with tiny fingers toward Whiskers, who gently touched his nose to her hand. The baby giggled with pure joy, and Whiskers began to purr with contentment. Watching this scene through their monitoring equipment, the Zephyrian observation team, now permanently assigned to study human emotional development, exchanged what could only be described as smiles. "They continue to amaze us," Veltar noted softly. "They continue to teach us," Mordak agreed. "They continue to show us what is possible," Zixia concluded. In that moment, as an infant human and an Earth cat shared a simple gesture of affection, the future of galactic civilization was being written. Love had proven to be the most powerful force in the universe, capable of transforming not just individuals, but entire worlds. The galaxy would never be the same again, and that was exactly as it should be.